So if the leaks are to be believed, we are supposedly going to be getting an 86 Megatron next year, and considering that the leak says he's going to be a leader class, it means we might get a new Megatron mold soon. And I think it's a great thing personally, because at the minute, if we're going to be getting a G1-esque Megatron figure, we're just getting a redeco of the Siege mold. And I'm going to be honest, all of its variants have yielded different levels of quality over the years. But luckily today, I have one of the better ones. And this one is the Netflix Megatron that comes with the 2 minicons and has the metallic silver finish, which I think is just one of the better versions that we got over the years. Personally, I would have traded out the 2 minicons that this version comes with in favour of the spoiler pack one, which has the Matrix Bandolier, but the rest of the spoiler pack isn't as good as this variant, so it's just a trade-off. And while I don't necessarily like the Siege mold, this figure just has a presence about him that just screams Megatron. This version of him is just so unapologetic with who he is, and you can just see that when looking at him. Because in my opinion, all Megatron figures need to come with this weight that tells you that it is Megatron. And this version of him definitely does that. This Megatron definitely comes with his fair share of accessories as well. The first thing he has is his fusion cannon, which is probably the best version of the fusion cannon we have on a Megatron figure. It comes with a sword, which makes up most of the tank's gun, but personally I wouldn't display it in the sword form. And 2 minicons, which also make another gun and another sword. Personally, I can kind of take or leave the minicons. They've got no articulation, you can only really move their shoulders and their legs, but that's fine, but I just don't really display them. Megatron does also come with a couple blast effect parts that are mainly used for the minicons. They're just not really good. There are so many other figures out there that come with much better blast effect parts, and they just make these ones kind of forgettable, to the point where I forgot to film them. As for his size, he's probably a standard Voyager class for modern standards, which is nice. He looks good amongst a crowd, but I'm kind of hoping that the 86 release comes in a little bit taller, just so he stands out a little more. Articulation wise, he's pretty standard for when he came out. He is missing some pieces I would love to have now, but overall you can still get him into the Megatron poses, but you just kind of left wanting more. Mainly that wrist swivel. I feel like the sword would be so much better if you could move the wrist with it. He also has something I've never really seen before, which is some of his joints are weirdly locked into place depending on where they're sat. I tried to show it off a little bit during the articulation, but it's not really coming across properly on camera. But trust me, it's there. Ankle pivot is weirdly locked in. I can only assume that's because of the transformation, but it doesn't really make any sense to me. And the one that completely makes no sense to me is the fact that the wrist is locked in when it's standing straight. So you can only really curve it at a 45-degree angle before you have a free range of movement. But don't get me wrong, he still poses nicely. Like I said, the Megatron poses are very much there. I just wouldn't expect Tarn in terms of his posability. But for the transformation, it's actually really fun when you get the hang of it. And it does one of those things that I can really appreciate about any Megatron figure, which is that the fusion cannon is fully integrated into the transformation itself, and it's a necessity to transform it into the tank, to the point where I believe it's the first step to rotate the fusion cannon the other way round on his wrist. I just think that's an amazing feature, and it just leads to a really good alt mode. The tank mode itself is great. From the front of the tank itself is very mean looking. It just screams Megatron. It captures the look very well. However, the back of the tank just looks hollow and kind of forgotten about, and it's just very disappointing to see. The biggest issue I have with it is that the legs are just kind of there, and the feet aren't even transformed. He just has his feet on the back of the tank. I could forgive the back of the tank if the cannon itself was movable, but it isn't. The cannon is permanently facing forward, which limits like 99% of the posability that you could have for Megatron. And it's just especially disappointing when you compare it to other tanks that were released later on. But I have to say, on overall, this is definitely a fantastic Megatron for the time. But I definitely think we are in dire need of a new G1 Megatron. When it comes down to a recommendation, both for the variant and for the mold itself, not really. Considering that the 86 Megatron is supposedly coming out in a year, and by Hasbro standards we're probably going to get a look of it in a few months, I would suggest just waiting out and just seeing how you feel about the new look. If you're specifically going for a Siege display and you need a Siege Megatron, I still can't really recommend this variant, because he is very expensive on the aftermarket, approaching Commander class prices. I guess if you could find this mold for retail, or maybe just a little bit above. For me, I got him at retail for £45, and I personally like it for that price. I think it's a great version to have for the price. But you're so much better off just waiting to see what 86 is like. The only other thing I can really think of is taking a look at that 3-pack that came out with a more G1 finished Megatron, because you also then get a Shockwave and a Soundwave. But I've heard that version of Megatron was slammed by mold degradation, so I don't know if I can even suggest him. But I am happy to have this variant. It's a variant a lot of people own, so I'm glad that I do have it and have in one of the better versions. But can this mold now please die? Okay, bye!